All right, let's talk about skin color. So skin color is going to be an interaction between the dermal blood supply and also whatever pigments you have in your skin. So looking at this individual, you can tell this side is more flush. That's because those vessels in the dermis have actually dilated or gotten bigger. And so more blood is towards the surface on this face versus that face. When does that happen? Whenever you're hot, so after you work out, you might see a little flushing, or when you get cold, you might see a pallor appear, so a lightening of the skin. In this gentleman's case, he's actually drunk in this picture, which can also cause flushing. So, cool thing is that all humans have roughly the same number of melanocytes, or those cells that make melanin. So it doesn't matter if you're Barack Obama or George Bush, you have the same number of melanocytes. It's just how much melanin they secrete and how long that melanin stays in those keratinocytes. So skin mostly is going to be genetic. If you look at your skin, it's probably going to be a little bit looking like your mom and your dad kind of merged. But it can also be affected by stuff like sunlight, UV rays. So looking at Megan Fox, very pale in this one, not so pale in this one. So, spray on tans also can change your skin color, if not the pigment concentration. So as you come into contact with UV rays, those actually stimulate melanocytes to make more melanin so they can protect those other keratinocytes. It's also based on the condition of the blood. So if you have really well oxygenated blood, you're going to see like a pinkish tint around the hands. It's kind of red. The skin appears really healthy, right? Versus if you don't, you can get this thing called cyanosis, which is bluing, where the skin is really thin, like under the fingernails and also around the lips. So of our accessory structures, the first one we're going to talk about is hair and your hair follicles. So this is showing how a hair follicle develops from when you're a baby, so the development of it. Hair grows out from down here. You can see where the dermis reaches up inside, but most of this is made up of the epidermis. And just a little bit of this dermal papillae is the dermis. And you're going to have a lot of capillaries here, a lot of blood supplies, so these cells are highly mitotic. They're doing a lot of division and pushing these cells up. And as they get pushed up, they're going to keratinize and they're going to die, just like the cells on the surface of your skin. When you're looking at a hair follicle, you have the shaft, which is going to be this part that is exposed. And then down here, you're going to have the root. You're also, here again is that dermal papillae. Here you're going to have a concentration of melanocytes to give your hair its color. And then here is the erector pilae muscle or the piloerector muscle. Either way, it's the same thing. It's a bundle of smooth muscle that can cause this hair to stand up. So normally it's laying down, and when that erector pilae constricts, it causes it to stand up. It also causes your skin to get a little bumpy look on it. So this gives you your chill bumps or your goose pimples or whatever you call it, chicken skin. Is this muscle contracting? Something you'll also notice in this figure is the sebaceous gland. You're going to find them associated with hair follicles, but they're not just at hair follicles. They're spread all over your skin, and what they do is they release sebum. Sebum is kind of this oily secretion, and it helps to keep your hair and your skin soft and water resistant. So the sebum helps to also retard water loss. And then we have our nails. Your fingernails are protective coverings. They're going to cover the ends of your digits, fingers and toes, and they produce a lot of keratin. So fingernails, hair, made of the same stuff, made of keratin. The nail grows out from the lunula. Man, I have a hard time saying that one. And so if you look at your finger, you'll have a little like crescent moon there at the base of it that looks white. That is part of the nail matrix that the nail is then going to grow out of. So if we look at this picture, here you can see the lunula. Here's your nail. Here's the eponychium, or your cuticle. And back here is where the root and the matrix is going to be, and that's going to continue out here. And so this is where those cells are being produced, where they are keratinizing and dying. So the reason it looks white right here is because the cells that are present still have their nucleus. And so they'll lose their nucleus and then die. And it appears clear. It's very cool. So getting to our sweat glands, we have a couple different types of sweat glands. We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about epithelial tissue. The first one is going to be your eccrine sweat glands. These are merocrine sweat glands. You find them pretty much on every body surface. So you can get sweaty hands, right? Your feet can get sweaty, head, neck, back, pretty much everywhere. And it responds to elevated body temp. So as you get hot, those vessels are going to dilate that are found in the dermis, and it's also going to activate sweat glands to secrete sweat. And what happens is when that sweat evaporates off your skin, it takes a lot of heat energy with it. And so that helps to cool your body. It also helps to dilute waste because, as we talked about, it has those salts. It also has urea in it. And so not only are you cooling the body, you're also getting rid of waste. It's a pretty cool mechanism. When you look at the sweat glands, you can see them down here in the dermis. They have this very tubular body, secreting those products without losing any parts of the cell because it is a merocrine gland. And then the pores go up to the surface and you secrete a liquid. The second type is your apocrine glands. These don't become active until around puberty, and they respond to emotional stress. So whenever you're stressed about like speaking in public or something and your armpits start sweating, that is going to be these apocrine glands. And they've been linked to stuff like pheromones. Nothing has been proven, but there could be some links to that. You're going to find them in the armpits, in the groin region. Apocrine, so they're going to secrete a part of the cell as the product too, and so they lose a bit of their cytoplasm with each secretion. When you look at them, they look a lot similar to eccrine sweat gland, except the lumen on the tube is much wider. The sweat that comes out of these apocrine sweat glands has a lot of protein in it because it does have part of the cytoplasm, but it doesn't stink. But why do you get BO? Well, you get BO because bacteria eat this protein-rich sweat and then poop it out. And it's actually that bacteria poop that smells. So when you have BO, it's not you that smells. It's the bacteria poop on you that smells. That's pretty gross. Alright, so this is just a little flowchart showing you the types of glands we have. You have your sebaceous, so the ones associated with your hair follicles or the ones that go straight to the skin. And then your sweat glands, merocrine and your apocrine. This is your typical sweat. This is the sweat that you get around the groins and armpits. Also, your earwax and mammary glands. So, what happens to our skin as we get old? Well, the hair turns color, so the melanocytes that are here producing this melanin actually die. Those stem cells die out, and so you're no longer producing melanin. Mitosis slows down, and so the number of skin cells you're making slows down. The number of hair cells you're making slows down, and then they don't get replaced. You also get an atrophy of sebaceous glands, and so you're losing that oil, that protection that helps to keep your hair healthy and your skin healthy. And so the hair gets drier and more brittle, and the skin actually becomes thinner and more translucent. The blood supply decreases, so you have less vessels there. This can lead to rosacea. Rosacea is where you get reddening in areas, specifically the cheeks. And it's because those blood vessels are dilating, they're opening up so they can get more oxygen and nutrients to the skin cells that are next to it. Also increased bruising, so don't drop your old person, they bruise pretty easily because these vessels are weakened. They lose a lot of collagen, and so they're not able to take those disturbances very well. And the thinnest skin are. With that lack of blood vessels, you also have a lack in thermoregulation. And so old people can get hypothermia or hyperthermia, so they're more susceptible to heat stroke. If you hear when the temperature is like 100 degrees outside, they're like, be careful you're working outside. Drink lots of water, especially if you're elderly. And that's because they're losing some of that thermoregulation. And so if you look at a person's skin as they age, you'll see it's going to be drier because they lose those sebaceous glands and the sweat glands. It's going to be paler because they lose the melanocytes. That's also going to make them burn easier. You're going to see less hairs, less sweat glands, changes in the fat distribution, changes in the collagen, and so you wrinkle a lot easier. Thin epidermis, thin dermis. I had some students who were working in nursing homes, and they told me about helping up an elderly person. They grabbed them by the arm, and when they pulled, the person's skin just slid off their arm because it was so thin. Yay, getting old. So, with that loss of melanin-producing cells, the loss of the melanocytes, they typically burn easier, and that can also lead to more skin cancers. So skin cancer is induced by UV radiation, so that radiation is going to bombard the DNA within your keratinocytes. And if they're the ones that are dividing, those mutations can then cause that cell to divide really rapidly and not controlled and form tumors and cancers. You see it again in the elderly, but also in fair-skinned people. And it doesn't matter if it's natural or tanning beds, it's still UV radiation. And there are three major types: basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma. Your basal cell is the most common and the least dangerous. So we're talking about those cells at the basal layer of the epidermis now have this mutation and start growing. They're the least dangerous because they hardly metastasize. Metastasis is when those cells spread to other places in the body via the blood supply or the lymphatic supply. And so you can see a lot of people who get this, as those basal cells invade the dermis, it looks like a sore, and they'll be like, I have this sore that's just not healing. That's because that sore is skin cancer. Another one that looks kind of like that is the squamous cell carcinoma. So this is from the keratinocytes in the stratum spinosum. They can metastasize to the lymph nodes, and when that happens, it can be lethal. And then the one that metastasizes the quickest is your malignant melanoma. These arise from moles, but it's only 5% of the cases. So of all the skin cancers, this one is the least common, but the most dangerous. And so when you're looking at a mole, if it has an irregular shape, if you look at this one, it's not round. Weird growths on it, it's not smooth, and you can see there's weird colorations, so it's not a solid color. That if you have any moles that look like that, they should definitely get checked out by a dermatologist immediately. And then last, we're going to finish up with burns. This is the leading cause of accidental death in the United States. What happens is you get damage to that skin, hyperthermal damage, right? You burn it, you destroy it, and that's going to cause fluid loss. Without our skin, it protects us from pathogens, right? We have those Langerhans cells there, and just it's a nice barrier in general. And so without that, you can get a lot of infections that normally you wouldn't. And then you also have the toxic effects of eschar, or this dead tissue, can make you sick and die. So on your burns, we have 3 types. You have the first degree burn, or a partial thickness burn. This is the least severe. This is like you're out in the sun too long and you got a sunburn, right? It just burns the epidermis. It's usually localized wherever that was. It can be red. There could be a little swelling. It could be painful. The next one is a second degree burn. So this one's a little more intense. It's a partial thickness burn, so it goes through the epidermis and into the dermis. If you ever burn yourself like on the stove when you're cooking, or the oven when you're cooking, and you got a blister, that would be a second degree burn. Or if you got a really bad sunburn and it blistered up, that would be a second degree burn. You destroyed this layer of the epidermis and you went down into the dermis. This can damage hair follicles that are down here, any of the nerves that are down here, or the glands, and so that can damage that area of skin. And then lastly, your third degree burn, the worst type. You have completely destroyed your cutaneous membrane. It went through the epidermis and the dermis. This can cause contracture and disfigurement. So contracture is talking about like bones fusing. My friend had a guy that he knew that was jumping over a bonfire after they had burned it down, so it was just the ashes, and he jumped over and he didn't make it, and so he put his hand in the ash, and when he came up, his fingers were fused, and so he ended up with a third degree burn going all the way up his arm, and they had to like surgically separate his fingers from each other. Pretty gross. So third degree burns are really bad and can definitely lead to death. And that is it for the integumentary system. We'll be picking up with digestive and respiratory next time.